thinking about long-term stuff like climate change or things that don't affect us, right in our face every day, and trying to be concerned about that and have that stay front of mind, and let alone to change behavior around that. One might even say that's everything, but it certainly is a huge part of the puzzle here. And so, yeah, that's a great topic.
Yeah.
But that is a through line. It's a connection between, I don't know, what is there, 3 or 4 generations between you and Caitlin of trying to...
7, I think. Possibly, I don't know.
But, the notion of sustainability is so huge and so important that it attracts people from all different backgrounds. Welcome to Sustainability Decoded with Tim
and Caitlin.
On our podcast, we break down what's happening in climate, sustainability, and ESG.
And along the way, we help you get smarter about sustainability. So let's get into it. For today's episode, it really felt like we had a third host, which makes sense because our guest is a journalist and he has his own podcast.
Joel Makower is the chairman and co-founder of GreenBiz. It's a media and events company focusing on the intersection of business and the clean economy. Joel has been covering sustainability for about 30 years. He had a syndicated newspaper column, contributes to the radio show Marketplace, and has authored over a dozen books.
Throughout our interview, Joel's experience as a journalist is evident. He turned the tables and asked Tim and I questions. He also brought up new subjects for the podcast, including what a green consumer is, criticisms of the sustainability industry, and changing economic systems. I think Joel may have asked me as many questions as I asked him.
So I am a journalist by training, and I studied journalism in school, not because I necessarily wanted to be a scribe, but because I didn't have a clue what I wanted to be if I grew up. I really didn't know. And my hypothesis at the time was that under the guise of sticking my nose in other people's business and writing about it, I'd find something that I was interested in and good at and synced with my values and lifestyle and everything else. And for the first 15 or so years of that journey, it turns out what I was good at and interested in and synced with my values and all that was sticking my nose in other people's business and writing about it. And there were 2 things going on in my life when I was in journalism school. This is going to reveal how incredibly old I am. Well, one of those was Watergate, which was Woodward and Bernstein journalists as truth tellers. And the other was Ralph Nader, the original Nader's Raider consumer advocate, Ralph Nader, not the election destroying Nader. And that was sort of every man as dragon slayer and truth teller and taking on the big companies. And so those combined things were interesting to me. So I started off as sort of a consumer reporter, but I quickly learned that in order to write about consumers, you really needed to understand business. And so plodded along there, and a lot of the things that I did early in my career were sort of, if you go back, it's all at the intersection of business, technology, and society. But along the way, I had written articles about solar energy for Washingtonian magazine in the 70s.
In 1981, Joel published his first book. It was titled Office Hazards: How Your Job Can Make You Sick. He says that book led to his next one, which eventually paved the way for his career in sustainability.
In 1989, when I was asked by Penguin Books to create the US edition of a British bestseller called The Green Consumer Guide. So it was interesting, although when I looked at the book, I said, no, this isn't going to be relevant for US audiences. You'd almost have to write a whole new book. And they said, great, go ahead and write a whole new book, which I did. And it was published in the run-up to Earth Day 1990. And I was instantly anointed as an expert on green consumer issues and very quickly had a weekly syndicated newspaper column in 90 papers called The Green Consumer and was speaking across the country, actually around the world, preaching the gospel that every time you open your wallet, you cast a vote for or against the environment. And the marketplace isn't a democracy. It doesn't take 51% of people voting to make a difference. This is when I realized it didn't take 51% of people voting in a democracy either. It's a different story. Anyway, and then I quickly realized 2 things. One, there was no green consumer movement in the US. I looked over my shoulder and saw that I was kind of standing there by myself. But the companies I was being asked to come in and talk to about consumers were themselves engaging in a lot of energy, waste, pollution prevention, and a whole range of things. And that was interesting to me. So in 1991, I launched what we would now call a dead tree snail mail newsletter, an 8-page monthly newsletter called the Green Business Letter, in an envelope in the mailbox and all that stuff. And then I'm old enough to say the sentence, and then the web came along. And I realized that while I had always sort of thought of myself as an information pack rat, I was now in the new digital world a content aggregator. And so I had this idea to create this resource center called greenbiz.com on business, the environment, and the bottom line. And it sort of mushroomed from there. So GreenBiz is now a 50-person company in Oakland, California. We do some big events, which you and Persefoni have been a part of. We have a membership group of sustainability executives from big companies that we convene multiple times a year for what we call peer-to-peer learning and what they tend to call group therapy. Anyway, that's the world. So I don't run anything at GreenBiz anymore. I have this amazing team, but I get to be a part of it and help sort of look at what's next.
That is just an amazing story because, when people think about the confluence of business and environment, I think even to this day, it's a unnatural pairing of those perspectives. And so I think you broke that paradigm, you broke it early. And I think you saw the uniqueness of business caring about more than its own bottom line and have turned that into an incredible enterprise. I call it the empire with Joel on the throne there.
Can I ask a question? And because I am, after all, a journalist. And so,
he's turning the tables.
Get used to it. Tim, I've known you, as you said, for a long time back when you were at EPA region 2 or 3.
No, headquarters.
Well, I think you're all right, somewhere. But Caitlin, we've just met, and I don't know your journey. Can you give me a little bit of your story of how you ended up at Persefoni?
Yeah. So I guess on like a similar note to you, I studied like psychology at university because that's what I was interested in. And I wasn't quite sure how to like fit that in with sustainability because I'm super passionate about both of those things. So during my time at university, I kind of shaped my degree to lean more towards sustainability and tried to like combine the two. And I did my dissertation on like sustainable behavior change and what are kind of the barriers that prevent people from acting sustainably on an individual level, as well as like what motivates people. I think like many young people my age, sustainability is something that like is so ingrained in us and how we think about our jobs and careers moving forward. So it's just something I knew right off the bat that this is what I want to dedicate my life to. And yeah, I'm here.
And sustainability, whether it's in business or at home or anywhere else, is so much about behavior change and how you get people to change in one at a time, or in the case of a company, en masse. How that process works is I think still befuddling most companies.
Exactly.
Whenever we at GreenBiz do anything on employee engagement, for example, it always rises to the top, whether it's a story or a webcast or anything else. People really want to seem to be hungry for that. And it's just one of those evergreen topics. So yeah, you're right in the middle of it.
Yeah. We spend so much time in our own brains, but they're still like enigmas to us, aren't they? So it's quite a topic we have to decode, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about, long-term stuff like climate change or things that don't affect us, right in our face every day, and trying to be concerned about that and have that stay front of mind, let alone to change behavior around that is, one might even say that's everything, but it certainly is a huge part of the puzzle here. And so, yeah, that's a great topic.
Yeah.
But that is a through line. It's a connection between, I don't know, what is there, 3 or 4 generations between you and Caitlin of trying to...
7, I think. Possibly, I don't know.
But, the notion of sustainability is so huge and so important that it attracts people from all different backgrounds. And it's one of the things I love about it is that you can contribute with almost any background to this field. Mm-hmm. But what you were just talking about in terms of changing people's minds, changing their behaviors, that's fundamental. And I think, you do it through your media enterprise, GreenBiz, which is fantastic and has grown so much every day. Tell us a little bit about where GreenBiz is going next. I mean, you've kind of created this platform. You said it took many years to do, and I think you were a first mover, but what's next for GreenBiz?
Well, we're growing like Topsy. It's really exciting. We're in a really nice growth spurt. COVID was, in that regard, very, very good to us because it forced us to sort of rethink our model, which was all about bringing people together in real life. But it's also forced us to really have a much more of a digital presence other than just having a website and some webinars, we call them webcasts. And so, we're growing great. And we've really focused on 4 brands.
GreenBiz holds several major conferences that represent these brands. They include GreenFin, which focuses on finance and investing, GreenBiz, which is about sustainability at large companies, Verge, which concentrates on climate tech, and then the 4th brand and conference looks at the circular economy. It's called Circularity. The circular economy is a model that aims to transform our take-make-waste system of living. Principles that drive a circular economy include, first, eliminating waste and pollution. Second, circulating products and materials like reusing, repairing, or recycling materials. And finally, moving from extraction to regeneration, where we give nature room to thrive. Now back to Joel and GreenBiz.
In each of those 4 buckets, profession of sustainability, circular economy, ESG, and climate tech, we're building out a number of different properties. We're building out membership networks. We obviously have newsletters. We're going to be building more of those out. There'll probably be a podcast in each of those, and a number of other things. You'll start to see much more take place in the digital realm as well. Some offerings beyond simply news and newsletters. So growing in a lot of different ways. It's very exciting.
I mean, to kind of get onto the decoding side, it's sort of such a simple question. It's so complex, but how do you define green business?
Well, it's funny because we don't really talk about green business, which is, ironic because our company name is GreenBiz. And people, I actually hate the question, not that question, Caitlin, but the people ask me naturally, well, so what are the greenest companies? God, I hate that question because I don't know. And there's no company that really, is all that. And every company has issues, even the ones people like to hold up as icons, Patagonia, for example. I mean, Yvon Chouinard, their founder, will be the first to tell you they've got huge, huge, huge inputs and outputs, emissions, and they're making so much from polyester, which is petroleum based, and on and on. And yes, they've got lots of innovation in materials and a number of other things. They continually pushing the envelope, but they're also pushing stuff. Despite the don't buy this jacket, iconic billboard and magazine ad and all that stuff, they're still selling not just stuff but high price stuff. And so every company has this issue. So we don't really define green business, Caitlin. It's we talk more like everybody these days, and I think of sustainability as sort of an intergenerational golden rule that that applies to people as well as to the world's largest companies.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think without trying to, put a fine point definition on it, when we met, Joel, as you pointed out, I was working at EPA, even though I was in the Research Triangle Park area, it was the headquarters office for air quality regulation. And we were developing the Clean Air Act and several of those things. But back then, companies were to be regulated, not to be trusted. And now maybe a green business is a business that's trying hard without being told what to do by regulators. They're never going to be perfect, right? That's impossible. But there is a movement to be more responsible. And I think that movement has taken off over the years I've known you, perhaps and primarily because people like Caitlin, who are young and see the world differently and hold companies accountable for their impacts. In fact, over the years that I worked in big corporations, many of the young people that applied there would first read our sustainability report and want to know if it was real and are they able to get involved in some of those topics during their employment. So I think the world has changed. I think that while we can't kind of nail down the definition of a green business, we know that most large companies anyway are trying to be responsible for people on the planet.
Yeah. I mean, the bigger question, or an equally vexing question, is and as I was saying, as I started my green career is what's a green consumer? And what's the role that they play in all this, in not just in shopping, but in voting, in investing, in choosing where they want to work, in all the ways that we individuals show up in the world every day. But so most consumers don't even have that, and they don't even have those aspirations. They may say they do. And so I think it's just really interesting is how do we know individually and collectively, are we succeeding? Are we doing the right stuff? There's some great data from my good friend who says that most people believe that I think there's Americans, that the number one solution to climate change is recycling. I mean, really? I mean, I can see you right now and you're both shaking your heads like, incredulously, and you should be, because after all these years of talking about energy and electric vehicles and solar and wind and so many other things. And yeah, maybe people don't necessarily understand the climate implications of the circular economy or some other, or finance for that matter. So I think we have some huge issues here just in education and communication that if we don't solve, it's going to be so much harder for the companies that Persefoni and GreenBiz engage with every day to make the progress at the scale, scope, and speed that's required.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that also, that green consumer thing might be changing as well. I would point out my co-host, Caitlin, who is a avowed vegan and lives a very sustainable lifestyle, probably much more so than I do, because she does walk the talk. She makes it part of her life. And that's a big deal. And I think, Caitlin, would you agree that many in your generation sort of take it that way?
Yeah. When I was in university, I did like a super small scale study just amongst the students in my university and asked them what motivates you to buy oat milk instead of dairy milk, or not shop fast fashion, shop secondhand, or kind of all of these things. And a lot of people's answers were so fascinating. They were so aware that, turning the tap off while you're brushing your teeth is not going to make the biggest difference. A lot of them were like, I've thought about not having a child because I want to reduce my impact. And that is such a huge decision and huge weight that, I'm seeing on the younger generation. And they're really considering those things as being consumers as well, and just how that fits into their future. So no, I'm totally seeing that change in the younger generation. But I guess the one thing that's so difficult for me to grasp on a business level, how do we measure progress? How can we tangibly see? Joel, I read your article about, it was titled The Sobering Reality of the Sustainable Development Goals, which was definitely a sobering article. And, you wrote about how we're not doing very well on that front. We're very behind. But, how can businesses actually measure something like that? How can they measure their progress towards the SDGs? Is that something we can do?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. I mean, companies measuring their progress in general continues to be a challenge. I mean, the whole net zero phenomenon is, what are we really measuring here? Are we really, is it sort of an accounting trick, or is it an actual reduction in things that the planet would care about?
Some companies have committed to net zero emissions within a certain time frame. That means they're cutting their emissions and making up for any emissions they do produce. They can balance their emissions by purchasing offsets. That means funding projects that fight climate change and therefore offsetting the carbon they are using. While carbon offsets allow individuals and companies to lower overall emissions, this activity does not necessarily force companies to cap their own emissions.
So I think that that's a challenge. But when you get into things like the Sustainable Development Goals, ending hunger, ending poverty, educating women and girls, things like that, first of all, what's a company's fair share of solving that problem?
We talked about the 17 SDGs in our episode with Jane Diplock. She's the former chairman of the Executive Committee of the International Organization of Securities Commissions, or IOSCO. Following her career as a regulator, She told us she's a big proponent of the Sustainable Development Goals set for 2030 by the UN. Meanwhile, Joel says he's worried that the goals aren't tangible enough and that the world needs to speed up the pace of its progress. By the way, if you haven't heard our conversation with Jane, she shared insights in our episode titled, "Should Machines Read ESG Reports?"
Even if there's no discernible negative impact that a company is having, if those truly are global goals, as they're often referred to, then global companies, multinational companies, should, be leaning into those. And how do you do that? And to your point, Caitlin, how do you know if you're making progress, of doing enough? We don't have those metrics right now. We don't have those accounting frameworks, let alone standards that says, this is a typical computer manufacturer, IT manufacturer, impact on poverty or hunger or even ocean pollution. They're just things that don't exist. We know about e-waste, perhaps. We know about their energy use and their data centers and certain things, and those can be addressed and presumably are. But we simply don't even understand the nature of the problem enough to be able to understand what does it take to solve them. And then just even if you don't do it as a metric, just as a moral obligation, what is the moral obligation of a multinational company? I'll just pick on multinationals because you could do this at the smaller scale as well, to help solve hunger globally. I mean, there isn't one. And, in some legal circles, certainly in the United States, with the frameworks, it's, actually, you may be working against shareholder interest. And so it may be violating your fiduciary responsibility to investors to even indulge in those things. Not that companies aren't doing plenty of things in philanthropy and employee volunteerism and other things. But anyway, this just gets to the complexity of what we're dealing with. And software helps, and Persefoni is playing a huge role in helping companies, get a handle on their impacts, and both negative and positive.
Yeah. I mean, you've also wrote how, the critics of sustainability and the sustainability movement as a whole have a point, right? What are some questions that are continuing to be brought up by critics that you think are valid?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one is, for all that's going on, is it really moving the needle on the world's largest social and environmental challenges at the scale, scope, and speed we need to head off anything from, catastrophe, basically? Are we really succeeding, or are we celebrating incrementalism that feels good, but isn't really doing what we think we're doing? That's number one with the bullet, my question. And then below that is, how much should companies be trying to lean into social and environmental issues? Some of us would say a lot. And because companies do that anyway, whether they want to or not, just by their existence, and companies have often, going back to the early industrial age here in the United States and elsewhere, that, companies have taken care of their employees and taken care of whole communities, and been, what we would now call socially responsible. It was just the way business was done. And so, is that somehow different now? Is it different that companies are saying, wait, we need to unwind fossil fuels, we need to get off those, and we need to, whether it's through policy or finance or markets, supply and demand, we need to be doing that. Is that somehow an inappropriate intrusion into social engineering or something? I don't know. I don't think so. But other people do. And so I think these are really good questions, whether, even if we may not like them being asked. I think this is a really, important moment in sustainability, because for a long time we were, sort of free riders. We were early adopters, and we were doing God's work and sort of flying under the radar. People didn't really understand what the hell sustainability was in the first place. It's gotten attention. It's making a difference. It's moving money, trillions of dollars in financial markets, and companies are reorienting their products and processes and business models, and it's having an impact. So we're in this really, I think, pivotal moment now where we're asking a lot of questions, or others are asking questions of us. And frankly, it's a healthy thing.
I want to pick up on that point, because stepping out of the host mode, I have an opinion, shocker, that The corporate responsibility movement has done well and continues to do well. As I mentioned before, I started as a regulator. Companies needed to be regulated and often dragged their feet and fought the regulation and were out of compliance often. That doesn't happen as much anymore. And that's a good thing. Whether or not we can measure it in, broad measures like the Sustainable Development Goals or even more narrow measures, having worked on the private sector side for over 20 years, I can tell you firsthand that it is having an impact, and a global impact, and a good impact.
My generation, which, I'm baby boomer and we grew up with a lot of idealism and a lot of we can change the world stuff, it has grown pretty cynical about the power of companies, and are companies really committed? Are they really serious? Or is this just window dressing or greenwashing? I'm wondering what you're seeing, Caitlin, in terms of, do people look at this askance? Younger people look at this askance and say, really? Or do they just say, right on, this is great, and, yes, we need to do more? What are you seeing?
I think right now, I still think a lot of it's window dressing, really, which is scary and hard. A company like Amazon, for example, they're making more of their vehicle fleet electric, and that's awesome and stuff, and a good step. But also, what do you do if your whole company's purpose is about, forwarding rampant consumerism and quick delivery times and buy and Prime Day? There's still so much to unpack. We have to change how capitalism works and how we think about consuming. And that's a huge thing, right? So there's a lot of work to be done. I still think I lean towards more of the cynical side. And there are some days and some companies I really am supportive of and get super excited about what they're doing. But I think a lot of the time it's hard, definitely.
Yeah. People in millennials and other young professionals, or just young people in general, saying we need to change capitalism. Are they thinking at that level?
I think so. Yeah.
I was just going to say that at some point you start getting into these very basic themes of how we've organized our societies. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that the way we've organized our society is around capitalism. And, it's the old Winston Churchill quote, it's the worst system except for all the others we've tried. Yeah. Is that true? And sometimes this, if you look back at history, there's been other systems that seem to have worked pretty darn well. And we continuously paint them as bad, and our society is the worst at that in America. We think we've got it right, and we're very exceptionalist about it. So it's some of those more fundamental questions that are really at the root of this that are also the hardest to get at.
Tim Moen, socialist sympathizer. I can see the headlines now.
There goes my political career.
Yeah.
Well, these are issues, and I think it's fascinating. I'm out for the rethinking capitalism. I think it's a really important conversation. I'm just not seeing it happen in a very robust way, and that's what I sort of was getting at, Caitlin.
Yeah.
But, Joel, I think you can take a lot of credit here. You've been at the forefront. You've created a forum for this man bites dog story of business caring about people on the planet from day one. And you said you were, the therapist in group therapy for all the CSOs that were trying to forge their way.
CSO means Chief Sustainability Officer.
And now you've said that a whole new generation of business leaders like Caitlin and others will be coming in to take our place, because our therapy session has timed out.
One of the most enjoyable, satisfying, and we hope impactful things that we do at GreenBiz, and it's not how we make money at all. I think, damn well close to 0% of our revenue comes from what I'm about to say, but that is to grow talent and inspire and elevate the next generation. We have all of our events, we have something called Emerging Leaders, where we give scholarships, including airfare and hotel, to come to our events and to participate to a group of young, diverse professionals. We certainly have our 30 under 30, and it's just not just a magazine feature. It's actually a community, sub-community within the GreenBiz community that we've nurtured and helped to network and end up hiring some of those, or certainly helping them find jobs. We're launching a nonprofit, greenbiz.org, which you've probably heard about, Tim, where specifically to create more opportunities for young people of color, BIPOC professionals in the sustainability field. And so this is critically important because you talked about the diversity of the field these days, Tim, and I agree, and I don't, because most people look like the three of us, just to say white and various ages, but we don't have the diversity we need of not just skin color, but also thought and lived experience. And bringing all of that to the table is, I think, going to be increasingly important as we realize that this is really about empowering everybody in communities around the world, and particularly those who have been the most affected and the least to blame for some of the environmental problems. How do we make sure that they are part of the solution set, part of the conversations that we are all having? And part of that is, how do they come to our admittedly expensive conferences and be part of those conversations? And we've made a small dent in that. There's a much, much bigger opportunity there than we as a little company are able to take on, but we revel in that opportunity. And it's, in my mind, and it's, as I start to look at the horizon of my career, that perhaps the most important work that I can be doing right now.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like developing the next generation will be a legacy for all of us who sort of started this and worked our careers in it. And I do think you just picked up a new applicant for your Future Leaders program in 30 Under 30.
Yeah.
Caitlin, right? I saw you getting all happy there for a minute.
Yes, exactly. I wanted to touch on one part of what you said, Joel, and Tim as well. I know you were talking about the difference between the global north and the global south, and us observing the effects of colonialism down the line and how that's changed communities. And like you guys said, it's easy for three people like us to go to a country and say, oh, this is what you should be doing here. And that is absolutely not the way that we should be thinking about that, right? Like, you want to enable resiliency in the communities themselves to support themselves, rather than have a third party person come in and say, oh, we know how it works here. Let's fix this and you'll be just fine. Like, we need to be thinking in terms of what they can do in their own communities with the resources they already have to build those jobs and resiliency.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely. And you started to get to what I was about to say, which is that it's more than just simply going in with humility and saying we don't have all the answers. We have a lot to learn from Indigenous communities.
Of course.
Around working with nature, caring for nature, around small scale, village scale water filtration or food production, or things that, we can take and learn from in the developed world. And so, no, we don't go in and saying, here are the 7 things you need to do.
Right.
But I think there is a certain hubris that we do bring to the rest of the world that is not probably serving them, or frankly us, all that well.
I mean, as you pointed out, Joel, which really struck me, is this part of who we are as a species? Or, is there hope? I think that's the struggle that we're all having. But for me anyway, and what keeps me getting up in the morning and doing what I do, is I can only do what I can do. And I'm super satisfied with that. I'm also satisfied when I look back over the 30 some years I've been doing this, that we have made some progress. And I think the last bit of conversation we had about enabling and developing others is also very uplifting, because I think I hope to be around, when some of my grandkids get old enough to take over leadership positions and watch where they go. So that to me is kind of what keeps me upright.
Well, that's what I love about our profession. Being in sustainability is an inherently optimistic profession. We wake up most days, not every day, but most days, thinking about solutions, thinking about possibilities, thinking about making the world a better place, thinking about moonshots, or sometimes now earth shots. We look at, how do we make the kinds of change we all want to see in the world? I mean, how cool is that? How lucky are we that we found our way into that profession? I just feel insanely fortunate to have landed here. I can't imagine, of course, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Tim, and possibly for you, Caitlin, can't imagine doing anything else. Or in my case, looking backwards, having done anything else. There's nothing else that would have delivered the same satisfaction and hopefully impact that I can think of.
Like you, when you made that choice to be the green consumer journalist, when I made my choice to go into environmental sciences, it was kind of like, What? Why? You'll never make a living. What's wrong with you? Plastics. Go work in plastics, boy.
Yeah.
But now look, I mean, you got 21-year-old Caitlin here saying, I want to work in the sustainability industry. Like, we didn't have that word before. So.
Yeah, no, it is an incredibly exciting profession and an exciting time, as bleak as some things can seem at times. This is just a really exciting field to be in. And by the way, it's populated, and I said this earlier, I'll just say it again because it bears repeating, with just amazingly kind and generous and thoughtful people. You kind of have to be in sustainability because you're concerned about the planet and about people and communities and all of that. You kind of can't be too callous in all of that, although there are those. We know them. But it's really, I just say it one more time, there's no place I'd rather be.
Is there some kind of key piece of advice that you want to give young people who want to work in this field, or something you'd recommend to people who really want to make sustainability their career?
I get asked this a lot, by not just young people, but also mid-career job changers who decide for whatever reason they want to, quote unquote, go into sustainability or work in green or clean or whatever, however they phrase it. I'll tell you a little story that sounds like it's a non sequitur, but I'll make a point. Mine was the last year at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, that you could get a BA in journalism. They abolished the undergraduate program. The rationale was, if you want to be a journalist, sure, take writing courses, but go major in something. Go learn history or biology or economics or something. And then, if you still want to, go to graduate school, get your master in journalism, sure, we got a graduate school of journalism and we'll all welcome you with open arms, but go learn something. And I think that's appropriate in sustainability, that to go into sustainability, yeah, there's some jobs out there, but learn finance, learn supply chain, learn marketing and communications, learn operations, learn human resources, and dig into something, get good at something or some experience in something, and then yes, apply your green gene, however you define that, to that job, and figure out how you can plant seeds or foment change or make good trouble in that company or in that industry. But that's the advice: is learn about something besides sustainability. Sustainability is too important to be left to sustainability professionals.
That's terrific advice. I can't think of a better place to end it. You've been an amazing guest and always full of insight and wisdom that I think will have incredible impact beyond both of our years. So I want to really genuinely thank you for coming on, because you're just, you've inspired me over the years, and I think you're now inspiring many others. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both, and thank you for the great work that you all do at Persefoni.
Joel is really thoughtful. He's been around and he's had like multiple lives, and he has so much perspective and experience to offer. And I think even he would say that he finds himself in a kind of pinch me experience of being in the position he's in, sitting on top of the GreenBiz empire, which has all of these massive events and ways to communicate with sustainability professionals, which wasn't even a name when he started this whole thing. So I just found it to be so rich of a conversation.
I totally agree. I mean, I think it's so important for the general public to understand sustainability and green business. And that's the whole point of GreenBiz as well. And Joel's writing is to make those topics accessible. I mean, I think we got into some really sobering topics as well in this episode. We got into the issues with our current system and how it's going, and very broad stroke, high level issues that are hard for any single one of us to fix up by ourselves. But like Joel said, sustainability in its very nature is idealistic, and we have to come to the table and trying to implement those. And so that was a good takeaway.
That's it for this episode with Joel Makower.
If you want to learn more about Joel and his work at GreenBiz, go to greenbiz.com.
Link is in our show notes.
Before we go, please don't forget to subscribe to Sustainability Decoded with Tim and Caitlin on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, it would be great if you could rate and review the show. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you in our next episode.
Sustainability Decoded is produced by our incredible team at Persefoni and Hueman Group Media. If you want to learn more about Persefoni and our climate management and accounting platform, please visit our website, persefoni.com.